Hi everybody, today I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens when we're feeling anxiety and why those things are actually happening. If you don't know me, my name is Dr. Kevin Hyde, and I'm a licensed psychologist here at Pinellas Anxiety Specialists. And as I mentioned today, I'm going to talk a little bit about anxiety, sort of the anxiety 101, if you will. Because anxiety is one of those things that we've all experienced. Every single one of us has, because it's normal. And would you be surprised if I told you that it's actually helpful? So when I say that to my patients, most of them give me this perplexed look because they know just how uncomfortable they are during an anxiety attack. But the reality is that anxiety is there for a reason. It's supposed to keep us safe. And the reason that we have anxiety is to identify and handle threats. But of course, this can become a problem when certain things in our daily life are identified as threats that are not actually threatening. And when that happens too often, that's when we have an anxiety disorder. And that's, of course, what I'm helping people with when they come in to see me. So what happens during an anxiety incident? First of all, our brain has identified that there is some kind of a threat to our survival. And because of that, it releases the stress hormones that get our body ready to handle that threat. And so with this, you'll notice things like your heart rate increasing, you'll breathe much faster. You'll notice that you sweat more, that your muscles feel really tense. And all of those things have a purpose. So for example, when your heart is beating faster and notice you're breathing faster, that's to get oxygen to those muscles. And the muscles are feeling tense so that they're ready to go, right? They're ready to jump out of the way of danger. And you're sweating because you're trying to cool your body down, again, so it's able to respond and get you out of that danger. You might notice that your stomach feels uncomfortable. And that's because digestion is not so important when you're being threatened right in that moment. And you can digest the food in an hour if you're still alive, because if you're not alive, there's no point in digesting that food. So the blood is flowing from that area to the rest of your body, again, to help you handle that challenging situation. And so when our brain is identifying those threats, of course, it's a bigger problem to miss a threat than it is to see too many threats. So to use an example, again, going back to evolution, think about those days when we're on the prairies in Africa. If we forget that lions are hanging out in a certain area of the prairie, what happens? We wander through that area and we end up eaten. So not very good. Now what happens if we think of there's too many threats? If we think that this area and that other area all have lions there, what do? We avoid those areas, so we might have to take a longer route to get wherever we want to go, but we stay alive. So that is much better than getting eaten, than dying. And so what happens is when our brain starts to identify threats in our daily life, it actually becomes a habit, right? So your brain sort of gets the sense that it's keeping you alive by avoiding these threats to you. And so it keeps doing that, and then your world shrinks and it becomes a big problem, and that's where therapy can be helpful. We can help you grow outside of that narrowed comfort zone and help your brain learn that those things are not actually threats. And so, as an example, public speaking is one of those things that almost everybody will agree is an anxiety-provoking situation. Of course, not everybody gets it, but most people do, or at least when they're starting out, they tend to get that anxiety. And why is that? I think we can all agree that there's not somebody standing up there who's going to kill you if you don't do a good job with public speaking. But again, going back to evolution, there's another reason why that's actually important. Because being part of a group meant that we were more likely to stay alive. And so if we're worried that we're going to screw up a presentation, that we're going to blow it up in front of all these people, and we worry that they're gonna cut us out, that they're not gonna be our friends or talk to us anymore. And so we worry that we're not gonna be part of the group. And so that brings up that fear of losing those people in that group that potentially important to our survival, or at least it was thousands of years ago. And so because being up in front of the group is a threat to something that's important to us, it is interpreted by our brain as something that needs that anxiety response, that stress response, because that's the only way that it has to respond. And so it brings out that fight or flight response. You might have heard of that before, Basically, it's that we either fight off a danger or we run away from it, or freeze as a part of that. We just kind of hide. So those are the responses that we have in those anxiety situations. And for a lot of people, they can function with that, right? They can feel that anxiety, still get up there, give the presentation, do a good job, and move on. But for others, when you feel that fight, flight, or freeze response, you just shut down, right? It's just so overwhelming that you just can't go on. And then because of that, you start to avoid those situations going forward. And that avoidance is a big part of what keeps anxiety going. Because when we avoid those situations, our brain doesn't have the chance to learn that they're not actually threatening, they're not harmful, they're not going to be a problem going forward. And so your world ends up shrinking and getting smaller and smaller and smaller until it's to the point where you're not happy, right? You're not happy with your life. And that's where I can help, again, grow that comfort zone to live the life that you really want to live, doing things that are important to you. And so fear, as we know, it's a really strong emotion. And so when we're feeling fear, it sort of takes over our attention. And so we notice all those negative thoughts, all those negative feelings, and we believe that they're true just because that emotion is really strong. And so what we need to do is be able to not believe that those thoughts and those feelings are true simply because they're strong, because they're not necessarily true. Again, having that thought being up in front of a group that nobody's going to talk to you if you screw it up, I haven't actually encountered anybody where that's been true. I've known plenty of people that have blown presentations, but they still have friends afterwards. So that's one of the things that we can work on in our time together, is helping you change that relationship with those thoughts so you don't just necessarily fuse with them and believe that they're true just because they're strong. All right, so just to summarize, anxiety is normal. It happens to all of us, and it's actually helpful because it prepares your body to respond to situations where your life is in danger. Like if your house was on fire, it's getting you ready to escape. It is something that becomes a problem when it happens too often, and it shrinks that comfort zone to the point where you're not doing things that are important and meaningful to you. And the last piece I want to mention is that it's something that can be helped. It's something that can be worked on. We can help you find strategies both to relax and not feel as much anxiety, but then also if you do end up feeling anxious, ways to cope with it so that you can move forward and you can do those things that are part of your values, that you find really meaningful to you, so you aren't stuck being controlled by the anxiety, but you have a choice in the way that you react to those anxious situations. So I encourage you to reach out. I've got a few spots open here in my Palm Harbor therapy office. So reach out for a free consultation. I'd love to chat with you and talk about how we could work together and how we could help you live a better life.